I'm going to shoot through this. Your first thing is info dumps. I know it is so tempting to explain your world to the reader and to explain where the character is coming from and to explain why they are the way they are. The problem is that this underestimates your reader. This basically tells the reader that you don't think that they're clever enough to pick up the clues that you've laid down, that you have to actually explain it and write it all out for them. It's especially tempting if you're writing sort of a genre like science fiction or fantasy, where you've got a lot of world building, you've maybe got a very complex world with lots of history. As an example, The Hunger Games. I want you to notice that in The Hunger Games, we don't get in the first chapter a whole explanation of why the world is the way it is. We don't find out the whole history of the Hunger Games and the past that led to the current situation. We see immediately Katniss in her existing world, and we learn a little bit about this world. The rest is left for later. We can find out later why the Hunger Games are run. We can find out about the wars of the past that led to her world being the way it is now, and why the capital rules in such a way. The next thing to avoid is lengthy descriptions. As I said, you want to showcase your writing, but you don't want it to be showy. This is not the time for beautiful rhapsodic descriptions of the scenery. On the same line, no navel gazing, please. We do not want to start with the first 2 to 3 pages of your character in heavy introspection, contemplating their life, contemplating what's brought them to this point, contemplating how they feel about things. Most characters at the beginning of your story are not terribly self-aware. Your story will often be about your character finding and discovering self-awareness. So if you make them too self-aware in the beginning and too aware of their own limitations and their own issues and conflicts, you actually are not only taking something away from the reader, but also taking something away from your characters. This goes also for backstory. As I said, with the Hunger Games, there isn't a need to tell us all the backstory. We know in the first chapter that Katniss lives with her sister and her mother, and that her father has died. We actually don't get, if I remember correctly, a lengthy description of how he died until much later into the story. We also don't get her backstory with Peter until she actually meets him in chapter 2. There's so much that isn't revealed in chapter 1, and yet we are still so hooked by the story by that opening chapter. Another thing that I often see writers doing is they start with climactic action. They start with a massive scene to try and grab the reader. That very first point on my previous list was grab the reader's attention. Well, what better way to grab the reader's attention than to drop them straight into a scene where the bomb is about to explode and your hero or heroine is trying to deactivate the bomb. It's very exciting. But remember, this is just your opening scene. You've got to build rising action all the way through your story and end up at a climax. How are you going to top this scene if you start off with such huge drama? The same thing goes, for example, with the traditional dream sequence. It opens with the character running through the woods, and it's dark and it's scary, and you've really captured the reader, and then, oh, your character wakes up and the sun is shining. You're going to cheat the reader. My point number 7 there on this list. If the reader feels cheated, they're not going to trust you, and then they won't keep turning the pages. It is so important in this opening chapter that you build trust with your reader, that you establish a sense of confidence, that they trust you, that they are going to be taken on a very interesting ride over the next few hours that they spend reading your book. So don't cheat the reader. And I'm old enough that I often use this as an example. My apologies if you're too young to remember. But who here remembers Dallas, the TV show, the original TV show with J.R. Ewing, where they had probably the most dramatic season ever, ending in this massive cliffhanger? Not the one where Who Shot J.R., but they had this very dramatic season, and they started the next season with, and Bobby Ewing in the shower, we thought he'd been dead for an entire season, And by the way, that entire season was a dream. Basically, that was the beginning of the end for Dallas, because viewers lost faith in the series. So you don't want to cheat your reader, because there is a very large potential that they will feel misled, put the book down, and stop reading. And that is not the response you're going for here. And the last point on my list is avoid stereotypical openings. And I'm going to give you some examples. These are ones I've seen a lot over the years. The alarm goes off, the character wakes up, and they get ready for work. And while this is all happening, we find out who they are and what they look like. The next one, character looks at their reflection in a mirror and contemplates life. Yes, this is a nice, quick shorthand for you as the author to tell the reader what this character looks like. But I can promise you it is much more important that they understand what situation the character finds themselves in and who this character is as a person, rather than whether they have brown eyes or blue eyes. The next scene that I see come up quite a lot, especially in romance novels, is the friends discussing their issues. Friends lunching, friends out for drinks at the bar or a pub, while they talk about how much the main character needs to find a love interest or overcome XYZ issue. This is great for later on in the story, and I'll show you how you can use a scene like that and how they can be very useful. But as an opening scene, it's not the most active and engaging. In romance, other scenarios I see a lot is the bumper bashing, where the two love interests meet by one crashing into the other, or the job interview, where a character arrives for a job interview and the love interest is the interviewer. Or even worse, when the bumper bashing happens and then they walk into the job interview and the person whose bumper they've just bashed is the person interviewing them for the job. Right, well, now that I've given you some of my ideas for stereotypical openings, what have some of you seen? What have you seen loads of, perhaps in books that you've read, that you feel maybe have been a bit overdone? And have a go and type it in the comments.